for the township. And this is the first of our series of workshops on different topics. And tonight's topic is trail planning. And this all came out of the survey that we sent to all the township residents and property owners, asking them what they wanted to talk more about. And this was one of the things that people really wanted to talk more about. And you know, it was your comments were very broad. They weren't just like, we want a bike trail in one specific location, but people kept talking about ways to get around without a vehicle, by foot, by bike, on off-road trails or along the roadways in a safe place, either to places like schools or into town, or just to get short trips or within parks in the township. So it's a very broad discussion we're going to have tonight, and it's a big, big topic. It's a big undertaking to begin planning for trails. And so tonight is kind of where we start and just start to talk about it. So this will not be the last time we talk about it. And we are videotaping tonight's presentation. So it will be available to view later if you want to again on our website. And we'll have it available for our township elected officials who make a lot of the decisions, including the money decisions, and our planning commission, who are the ones who wanted to find out what you wanted to talk about and host some workshops on those topics. We have one more tomorrow night, same time, same place, on lake water quality. And then we have a couple of open spots at this location at the end of August, Wednesday and Thursday, the last week of August. We're leaving those open right now. I suspect one will be on invasive species, and the other one, we kind of want to see how these go and see if one of these demand an immediate turnaround second workshop for that slot at the end of August. But we'll keep you all up to date. I think you all gave us email or other contact information. We have an hour and a half, so we'll try to stick to that time limit. We have two great speakers tonight. We have Emily Meyerson. I'll let her explain her affiliation, but she's a trail expert and trail management person from the Petoskey area, and Julie Clark from TART Trails here in our region. And Julie's here on her vacation week, so thank you for being here. And they've put together a really nice presentation for you. And after the presentation, we'll have plenty of time to ask them questions and maybe get some ideas going. And you know, we can write down any great ideas we get before we forget them. So go ahead. Thank you.
I'll stand up next to you, lady. So
I'm gonna stand over here. I don't like standing behind these things because I'm so short. I usually get hidden. Thanks for coming. Again, my name is Emily Meyerson, and I do have an interesting job. I'm an urban planner by trade, and I've been working in trail planning and recreation planning for about 15 years. And I work primarily with the Top of Michigan Trails Council in a job funded by the Department of Natural Resources to develop a trail system in northern Michigan. But I also do consulting work and do trail feasibility studies and do a lot of presentations on the benefits of trails in complete streets and walkable communities. So I'm here to talk a little bit about, you know, the trail development process, so sort of the next steps to start thinking about it. You want some facilities, but you don't know where they should go. Julie and I are going to sort of tag team a little bit, but our goals today are to talk about the benefits of trails. You probably know a lot of those, but we always like to start presentations to review them because they lead into so much else that we talk about when we're looking at partnerships and development, who we're going to work with. So tools of the trade, different options that you have, development process, success stories that we know in the area, and then discussion, well, with all of you to facilitate a discussion. So I just love this slide. It's just a funny one. Benefits to trails also include the benefits of a bicycle, which, you know, there's other uses of the trail as well. But I love it because it brings in a lot of things like gives you legs of steel, slows global warming, faster and easier than walking. It's quiet as a mouse, and you can see some of the other things. And it's fun to think about some of those benefits. So benefits of trails, the economy. We sort of look at it at three levels: visitors, residents, and businesses. Visitors, bringing more people to the area through tourism and recreation, bicycle touring, things like that. Residents, it's more than just bringing tourists and visitors here, but it's residents looking at where they want to live. They choose places because of walkable communities and trails. So a lot of people that are moving, where they can move anywhere in the world, they move to places where it's walkable. And people who are buying second homes, that's one of the primary things that they're looking at. So in our area especially, that's our target. And so it's really important to have walkable communities because that's who we're drawing here. As well as, of course, like quality of life, and the population we're targeting to move here is looking for that quality of life. And then businesses, it really attracts talent and it attracts the creative class, which leads back into those residents. And here's just some photos of some bicycle touring along trails and what it's doing to the local economies and small communities along trails. Public health is the next big one. Of course, the Center for Disease Control recommends 30 minutes of exercise a day, and trails, provide the ability to do that. So that's really important to get people out on trails. It sort of leads back into the economy because Michigan and the whole United States is really fighting an obesity epidemic, and providing the ability to walk and bike hopefully will help fight that. So that's really important. And then I love the studies show it's easier to walk. And I always bring this up because I think it's a funny study that, it seems obvious, but if you live on a road that is narrow and people drive 55 to 65 miles an hour, you might not be comfortable walking down to the store that's only maybe a quarter mile away, or even walking to your friend's house next door in some places, or crossing the road to get to that store. So if you're comfortable and it's easy to do, people often will do it. So it's providing that. So sometimes it might not be a trail, it's just providing something to provide a safety net that people are more comfortable, so it's easier. So that's really important. And then, of course, mental health. We talk a lot about the public health and weight and things like that, but your mental health to get out and have activity is really important for the long-term health of your community. And this is a quick slide. This is a family on a bike trail, but it's more than that. It's the gentleman on the left is the medical director for Northwest Michigan, and he happens to be my brother, so I know this story well. He turned 40. He was 50 pounds overweight, and he's a medical director. He's supposed to be like, talking about public health. And diabetes runs in our family. He realizes, what's going to happen? Like, I'm not going to be alive to see my kids grow up if I don't do something. So he started, diet and exercise. But what happened is the Little Traverse Wheelway that goes from Charlevoix to Petoskey was only half done. In the year that he turned 40 and made this decision, they finished the last 7 miles into Charlevoix. And he lives in Petoskey and works in Charlevoix. And he started biking 17 miles to work. Now, I know not everybody's going to bike 17 miles to work, but the fact is he had that option and that choice. And he was able to do that, and he still bikes to work 2 days a week. And he was able to do that because there was that option, and that's what trails provide, are those choices. So I think it's important. Of course, climate, we all know the impacts, problems with climate change, and transportation, of course, is the leading source of climate pollution. So trying to reduce our driving time and biking and walking more will have an impact on climate. And also, short trips represent most of our trips, and those are the ones that you can bike and walk. So you start adding that together. And then trails are really important because of family and community. It really brings people together. It links neighborhoods. It links people to parks, people to schools. And it's something the family can do together. And I really see a lot of families out riding trails. It's a safe place for them to go with little kids and spend the day together doing things that are healthy and outdoors. So I think it's really important. I heard the mayor of Seattle speak once, and he talked about his most important issue is trails, because he feels when people are out on the trails, they're talking to each other, they're respecting each other, they're talking about issues, and it really brings the whole community together to move forward positively. So I think it does a lot. And then the last benefit is, I talked about it with my brother, is an option for mobility. There's a lot of people that don't drive. We're in a drive-centric world, but the fact is people under 16 don't drive. A lot of seniors don't drive. A lot of disabled people can't drive. A lot of people are choosing not to drive because they can't afford a car. They can't afford gas, they can't afford insurance. It's a big trend with younger people. So it provides options. And so that's another thing, is to really look at providing options for those people that don't drive. And people will say in northern Michigan, you can't do this, you can't. But Minneapolis has a 30% walk-bike share. And Minneapolis doesn't get as much snow as us, but it's darn cold. And they're walking and biking, and they use public transit. It mixes in. Walking and biking often uses transit. So you gotta see, sometimes they're walking or biking to a transit system. But it can be a legitimate form of transportation. And that's really important, is looking at trails, and walkability is not just for recreation, but also for transportation. So understanding these benefits, the reason why we review them is it really, when you start trying to plan, you start realizing who your partners are. You look through all that, all of a sudden you realize the health departments and the doctors, physical therapists, bringing those folks in. The environmentalists looking at the climate change. You can start seeing who some of your partners are, because building trails is a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. And so you really need to bring everybody together. And we're going to talk a little bit about who some of those players are. But I think that's really why I like to review the benefits, is to think about that. It really helps you build your case and move forward to get funding. So why don't we bike and walk more? Julie's going to tell you.
I'll turn it over. Yeah, thanks. So I'm with TART Trails. I moved up to the region about 3 years ago, coming out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I was thrilled to come up here and find that there was such a fantastic connected network of trails on the ground. And what's been happening recently is people really want to connect to a network. And I love my trails, love them, love them, love them. But what makes a good trail great is the connections that it makes, so the places that it goes. So Emily and I will tell you right off the bat that there isn't like a single place that all trails should be all places. We're going to talk about some tools here in a second. And this is one of the reasons we talk about these tools, is because there's a reason we don't walk or bike more. Who walked or biked here today to this meeting? Way to go, wow. All right, I'm getting the so-so. What'd you do? What's the so-so for?
Just short ride to the mailbox and back.
All right, okay. How about you?
Recreational, basically.
Okay. So I typically, all those benefits Emily went through, yeah, they're right on for me. I chose, luckily, to live in an area where I can walk and bike to work. It's my only form of exercise. God help me. But it's really important. It keeps me sane. It keeps the weight off as much as you can do that in a 1 mile trek to and from work. But a lot of people don't have the choice. A lot of people move to where they can afford to live. A lot of people just are limited on their choices. But the way we've done things for about 40 years now, actually we're creeping on 50, post World War II, was really about the automobile. And we stopped thinking about every other way to travel. And in fact, we've stopped spending money on that, not considering it transportation. That's wrong. It is a form of transportation, and you are limiting choices. We don't walk or bike many places because we don't feel safe, because there actually aren't conditions out there. So it's not necessarily a perception thing, it's a reality thing when you're faced with roadways like Division Street perhaps, or crossings that you can't make. If there's not a safe place to be, you're not going to do it. And Emily spoke to the fact that if you build things, people come. If you make it comfortable to walk, people will walk. That's why neighborhoods, that's why Traverse City urban areas, you do find people walking. Doesn't mean you have to provide the same facility everywhere, but the idea is you do need facilities to encourage different types of transportation options. And what we've really done a good job over the past 50 years is creating more barriers than we have opportunities. Not intentional, it's just we weren't thinking of all the different ways that people really get around. And we chose to really favor one mode over all the others. And what we're finding is it's really, really expensive and really difficult to retrofit. So these roads aren't so easy to change the character of them. Especially when we're out in rural areas or in really congested kind of spaces. It's just difficult and it's very expensive. So there may be a will, but there's the funding side of that equation too. So how do we think? This is my favorite slide. This is from Florida, because this is kind of how I feel we think about our cyclists and our walkers sometimes. there's a road there, it's all good, just, you know, scooch on over when you need to. Not thinking about what they actually have to face when you tell them to scooch on over. So maybe this is an exaggerated point, but it's actually the best sign in the whole wide world. So this is Florida. We obviously don't have alligators up here. But it's how we think about what we're doing with cyclists and walkers. So the way the trend has been nationally and on a statewide, and actually many of our local jurisdictions, including Long Lake Township, have signed on to something called Complete Streets. Complete Streets is another iteration of thinking about transportation as a whole. So what a complete street is a safe, comfortable, and convenient right-of-way for travel. That's everybody, however you get. It is not a prescription. It does not mean that every road has sidewalks, every road must be, you know, 66 feet wide, paved, XYZ. That's not it at all. What it's asking planners, engineers, designers to do is to think about how our right-of-ways look and how we're providing for all the different modes of transportation. So it's not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you it has to look like this. And Long Lake Township did sign on to a Complete Streets resolution. And all it's saying is, yeah, we acknowledge that there's things we should be thinking of and different modes that we should be helping promote. So today we're going to talk, Emily's going to go back in the development process, but while we're thinking about non-motorized activity, there are a lot of different tools out there that you can use to provide safe, comfortable, and convenient facilities. Trails come to people's mind because who doesn't love a trail? They're nice, they're comfortable, they tend to be in very scenic areas. So trails offer a lot of good things. That is one tool. Multi-use paths are great, and they fit in some places perfectly, and when they don't fit in other places, you have a lot of other tools at your disposal. So you have things like bike lanes, and bike lanes are on-road facilities. They're 5 to 6 feet wide, and it just gives that designated space on a roadway that's marked. So it's a marked space on a roadway facility for bikes. Of course, we all know sidewalks. Sidewalks provide great facilities for pedestrians. When we talk trails a lot, oftentimes we start focusing on bicycles, and we sort of forget those pedestrians out there. So when we do think multi-use, we do need to be thinking about all the different types of facilities. And sidewalks are not the same thing as a trail. You shouldn't have your bikes on your sidewalks. In some cases, that's just what happens. But in general, that's not where you should be designating your bikes. And for a lot of reasons, that's the case. And I can go on ad nauseum, really, about why, but I won't. So sharrows. Sharrows are fun things. We have a picture of them later. But what that is a shared road. And so it's what the transportation officials have started doing is trying to figure out how visually to tell drivers and bikers, besides general share the road signage. You know, we've all seen the yellow share the road sign. They're trying to get a little more creative, and sharrows tend to be in places more urban areas or village centers, where it's a marked bike on a roadway. So it's another visual clue for drivers and for cyclists that you're both in the same spot. So it's just one more confidence for a cyclist. Paved shoulders, they're a really easy application, and they're actually just as good for the road maintenance and long-term maintenance costs as they are for the bikers. So a paved shoulder can be a very adequate and safe facility if you're trying to get around on a bicycle or if you're trying to get around by foot. So there are a lot of different applications that you can use. So multi-use paths, I'll go into just a little bit more detail. I think we're all pretty familiar with that trail concept. In our area, we have a network. We have 60 miles of trail. And Petoskey, how many miles do you guys have up there now?
Well, not just Petoskey, the whole northern has about over 200 miles.
A lot of trail out there. So we're pretty familiar with what this looks like. There are specifications. I'm gonna pick out one person in this area. Scott's working with us with TART right now, designs trails. He is held to certain standards on what a trail looks like. You design it so that it is ADA accessible, handicap accessible, And also you follow standards so that you can control, just like a road, your speed, your safety issues on a trail. Because has anybody ridden the Leelanau Trail since it's been finished? Oh, get on it and check it out. It's very busy. And we recognize that maybe if we could have had some nice curves in there, we could have slowed some speeds down, just a little. But what we find is you can design a trail similar to a road. You can control a lot of things in addition to aesthetics. So, but what trails are difficult is you got to have the land and you got to have the money. They tend to be pretty expensive endeavors. So that's the Cadillac. And if you can get it, and again, in the right place, I love my trails, but I wouldn't want them everywhere. So other options that we have in different areas are those paved shoulders. And these are exactly as it's described. It's just on the side of the road. A lot of times, Long Lake Road was an example of, a couple years ago, TART partnered up with the Road Commission to actually pay for extended shoulders. So instead of the gravel shoulders, paved shoulders were put on portions of Long Lake Road. Paved shoulders provide both pedestrian and bicycle accessibility. A paved shoulder can turn into a bike lane easy enough. It just depends on your technical specifications and your roadway agency. So costs vary. It just depends on if you have to do a lot of drainage work. If you're cutting into a steep slope, that's going to get expensive quick. So if you can picture a big, wide, flat country road, that's pretty inexpensive to put on a shoulder. But if you're thinking of a curvy road that goes around lakes or cuts through hills, that can get expensive quickly. So, and there are safety issues when you're dealing with paved trails. You know, you have 5 feet, and we've seen distracted driving. We know what that results in, and a 5-foot buffer isn't so comfortable, especially maybe if you have that kid who's just learning how to bike. So it just depends on, again, the context. Other facilities, I've got a diagram here. This is what was done. It's just a conceptual. A small rural road that is going up a hill, so you can do different techniques to provide for both cyclists and walkers. So what you're seeing on the bottom slide is a bike lane up one side because you're biking slow. You aren't going at the speed of traffic. You're definitely not going at the speed of traffic if you're trying to get up Holiday Hills, for example. But if you're going down Holiday Hills, you may very well be going at the speed of traffic. So you can put something like a sharrow in, because your cyclists can be sharing the roadway. Again, this is very context sensitive. So bike lane signage, and we'll just talk about signage. Sometimes it's as simple as that. It's letting people know which routes are more comfortable, which routes would be more conducive to cyclists. So if you go into Traverse City, you'll see TART in town signs. That's a good first step. I will say that we are working hard to improve the TART in town route so that not only is it a comfortable facility, but it's a better facility for bikers. Because there are places like in Portland, Oregon, Madison, Wisconsin, where you go and the roadways favor the cyclists on these routes. And it's as simple as eliminating a stop sign. That's not, I'm thinking particularly in Traverse City, there are a couple areas where stop signs require cyclists to stop, but you're not going to. So you encourage more cycling by removing some of those impediments. So I'm going to turn it back over to Emily, and the facilities that we talk about, they require the same planning process. It doesn't matter what you're using, it's your goal. And so she's going to walk through trail development process, but it can be the same. We're talking about non-motorized activity. So we'll open it to questions if you have questions as we go through, but we're going to save them to the end. So feel free to speak up or stop me, or if anything sounds crazy or out of whack, just push the pause button on us.
Great, thanks, Julie. And one of the things, we are going to talk about a trail development process, but you can really think of it in a little bit bigger context in the township as really a non-motorized planning process. And you sort of would go through the same thing. So we're going to go through it and use some examples and what we do next. So the biggest thing always is your vision. You need to have a vision. And, it's not just you want a trail from point A to point B, but, where you want trails or different kinds of facilities. Why do you want them? To start thinking about. These are all the kind of things you have to do to find that vision. Why do you want them? Who are you trying to connect? You have local connections within your community, but then what about outside that community? Where are people coming to and going from outside that? So those regional connections and making sure you're meeting up. And the regional connections become really important because that's when it comes to funding, it's looking at how you connect regionally, especially with complete streets. This whole idea is looking at how the whole region connects together. So it's really important to take a look at that. The trail use, who do you expect to be using this? Is it bikers primarily, walkers? Is it year round? Are you going to want to be biking and walking? Is it a route that kids need to get to school so it needs to be cleared of snow? All those kind of things. And all these things really can only be decided by the community. Nobody can come in and tell you that. I mean, these are things that the community has to come to. Is the trail going to be a transportation corridor? Or is it primarily for recreation? What are those uses? And how does it fit in with the rest of your planning processes, like your master plans and transportation plans for the community? So it's really important to take a look at that and start talking about it as a community and develop a vision. And keys to do that is coming back to those partners that I was talking about earlier, is getting everybody included and on board from the beginning, and sometimes even the people who might be against it, having them on board, hearing what they have to say and why, and being understanding of that. And so really including all those stakeholders, and I mean, these are just some examples, but obviously the residents of the community, the road agencies, businesses, all the different types of recreational groups that might be using it. Environmental organizations, health officials, planners, the regional governments, the schools, senior organizations, disabled organizations. All of those are kind of people that might be using the facilities are really important. And then when you get a little closer and you're starting to look at actual route, is really engaging those property owners along it. And a good example of where it didn't totally backfire, but it put a project off, was in Charlevoix County. They had 80-foot wide road right-of-way. All the trail advocates in the county went ahead there and put a trail in there because there was enough room. And then the property owners slapped a lawsuit on them saying that you couldn't do that because you had to get an agreement from the property owners because the road's it's not for trails, it's only for cars. Well, it ended up, it went to the Attorney General's office and they had an opinion that said that's not true, that a trail is transportation. But it put the project off 2 to 3 years. It engaged the whole, this whole anti-trail project that was advertised in the paper, and it sort of went crazy up there. It has come down. They actually have funding for phase 1 for next year. But I can say it probably, if they would have engaged more of those property owners from the beginning, it might have moved the project ahead a little bit faster. So really engaging them. So then we started talking about trail location and design. Julie talked about all these different things. So it's not just trails. Maybe some places it's trails, some places it's shared roads. There's different ideas. But when you start talking about who those people are, who your audience is, who wants to use it, there's actually different types of riders. It's actually listed like in MDOT's manual when they're building bike trails. There's A riders, B riders, and C riders. A riders are the road bikers out in their spandex going 25 miles an hour. Usually they can be on a road. They don't need any facilities most of the time. And they're comfortable on the road. So maybe sometimes it's providing, like up those steep hills that Julie showed, is providing a safe place when they're going slower, but they don't necessarily need a facility. And a lot of times, honestly, those A riders won't use a bike trail. They would rather be on the road even if a bike trail is right next to them.
Or you want them on the bike trail.
Right.
Or off the bike trail.
Right. And a lot of times you don't want them on the bike trail because if you have someone riding 25 miles an hour with a little kid riding 5 miles an hour, that's just like being on a highway with someone driving 35 and 65. So it's doing that. B and C riders, basic, I always say basic is more the people that they can ride on a road if it's a really low traffic road, but they will ride on a trail if they have the choice. And then C riders are children, seniors, people who won't ever walk on a road. They'll only really be on a trail. That's where they feel safe. So it's designed that, and usually a bike trail, as we're talking about, or a multi-use path, is designed for B and C riders. It's designed for somebody at the most at 15 miles an hour is what your design speed at is slower. And so it's sort of looking at that. Are you designing facilities for people to commute long distances that are going to be, those, faster bicyclists, and so what your facilities are for. And then so those are the different things you really have to start looking at when you're looking at location. So then how do you start doing this? You start thinking about this, you talk about it, and sort of the next steps are to really start mapping, inventorying what you want to do and where you want to go. Easiest, of course, is public land. That's the first thing you always do. Where's the public land? Because usually that's going to be your easiest place to get through. Road right-of-ways, obviously utility corridors and railroads. And then start looking at, well, where are all the places people might want to be going? Start mapping those. School buildings, recreation areas, the commercial centers, the higher density residential neighborhoods. Because those are usually where people are going to or coming from. And then you start looking at where are there existing facilities. And I don't know if the township has that inventory, but looking at where are existing sidewalks now. Are there paved shoulders places and how wide are they? And if they're sufficient or not. If there's bike lanes or anything like that. And then determine the traffic shed. And I think this is really important because I've had experiences, and I'll show you an example, where people just thought they needed to get from point A to point B. But they weren't really thinking about really where people were moving. They might go from point A to point B, but when they leave point B, where are they going? So where's your non-motorized use? Are they going from the soccer field? Are they going back home? Or are they going back to the school? Or are they going to an existing bike trail? Or are they going downtown? Where is that movement? And really to start thinking about it. And you'll find sometimes it's not, maybe they went from school to the soccer field, but then afterwards, where are they going? And so where the facilities you want to meet the most needs with one facility. So it's really thinking about that traffic shed, just like a watershed of where everyone's moving. And then really you start putting all this stuff on maps, and then you have to start looking at your constraints, like wetlands. You can get through wetlands sometimes, but your costs increase quite a lot. So you want to know where they are, try to avoid them as much as you can. Really steep slopes, sometimes in our area you can't avoid it again. But again, it's going to cost you a lot more to develop it. Honestly, people using bike trails especially would rather not go up steep hills, so you try to also limit that. And so any other kind of environmental limitations, which could be, you could have endangered species or historic items that you need to avoid. So it's looking at all of those things. And then obviously property ownership, the different property owners, and it's putting a layer on there to see the different properties that you might have to go through. Because the more easements you might need or more properties you have to acquire to do something, the harder it is. And so you want to try to limit that as well. And then you start sort of putting it all on one map and try to figure it out. So here's the process I was talking about. This is actually in Harbor Springs, and it's a really simple one, and I use this as an example, is the schools. You can see where the schools are. They were trying to get to the soccer fields, their school soccer fields. And you can see downtown, you can see the public lands are green. The pink is a regional bike trail that goes to Petoskey, and it goes to a lot of neighborhoods to the east of the school. And the schools just wanted to get from the schools to the soccer fields and be done. And if you look at it, I have a pointer, but it doesn't show up very well. North of that green square here, there's one large property. You can't see that on the map very well, but so their idea was they could go through that public land, cut right through that one property, get an easement through the one neighborhood, bam, we're done. And they brought me in and said, can you do this? And I said, well, let's look a little bit more. And so then we talked about it. So then where do people go when they're done with the soccer? Do they go back to school? Oh, no, they go home. Well, where do they live? Well, most of them don't live back at that school. So how do they get there? So now they're on a really busy road. They can't get anywhere. There's a huge steep slope on it. Parents aren't happy letting their kids ride up this really steep slope, with going really slow. And so they started looking at, okay, let's look at some different options. So we started looking at some different options. We looked at steep slopes, a very steep area. You can see the purple as the highest steep slopes we're trying to avoid as much as we could. We started looking at all the subdivisions where different people live and where they were going to and from. And we started mapping out our different options. And here's the property lines. So you can start seeing the different easements you might need. Maybe you could cut from the schools over, but all of a sudden you needed easements from a lot of property owners. So we worked through that. We started considering all the different things that I just talked about. Deed restrictions. Some of the neighborhoods we thought, oh, it'll be easy to get through here because like the subdivisions had some like common property, but it ended up they were all deed restricted, that they couldn't have a trail like this through there. So that's something you think it's really obvious. Oh, it's this neighborhood, they want this, and everybody there wanted it. But the deed restriction would have had to be changed, and that would have been very difficult. Again, we talked about the environmental impacts, historical impacts. You run into that more than you think, especially like on rail corridors. You'll run into a lot of historic issues. So take a look at that. And then when you're planning, you also have to look long-term. First, you just want to get from point A to point B, but how are people going to get on the trail? Maybe you have an existing park that has parking, and you don't have to build a new one. So, you start having to think about those access points, the scenic places. People like trails that are scenic. Can you, maybe cut off your trail a little bit to get to a scenic overlook, or have a separate spur that goes out to that overlook? So sort of incorporating some of those ideas to make your trail sort of, I always say that trails are good, but you can make trails great by having great amenities. So, and then also I always talk about law enforcement. They'll have a lot of great ideas and concerns, and really engaging law enforcement from the beginning. I've actually, whenever I've done a trail feasibility study, I go and actually sit down with the sheriff or the police chief and say, well, what do you think? What are the existing problems? These are some different ideas. What do you think of those? And try to work through it with them to get them on board. And then we talked again about the regional connections. So in that project I was talking about, we have a regional trail. The proposed trail wasn't ever going to get near the regional trail. It wasn't going to connect to it. So then you do all that, and then you start coming up with your preferred route, but is it feasible? What's there? Again, we talked about wetlands, high traffic road crossings, active rail lines are very difficult to cross. A lot of times you can't get crossings. You can't cross designated natural rivers, and any kind of river crossing is going to increase your cost quite a bit. So looking at all those different things. Limiting, obviously, your number of private properties you might have to cross if you need easements is really important. And limiting the number of driveways. The more crossings you have of a trail, the more dangerous it is. So every time your trail crosses a driveway or street, you have a place where there can be potential impact. So trying to limit that. So when you look at your options, you're trying to really limit how many crossings you're going to have. And I'll do that. I'll go and count. I'll say on this side of the road there's 22, and on this side of the road there's 15. And so that becomes a big reason to maybe put it on one side of the road. So looking at those different things. And in this project, the reason why I use this as an example is it actually was built. They did pick the west side of Hoyt Road, and this is actually the steep slope. It has to go up. It was an expensive project. They put in a huge retaining wall and went up the side of the road and put in a 10-foot wide sidewalk, because this was in the city limits. They wanted it concrete, and it switched to asphalt actually in the township. But they looked at all their options. They weighed the options. They looked at what was most safe. They looked at cost comparisons. They looked at who would use it the most and made that decision to move forward. And this was actually a safe route to school project, and they got funding through that program to build it. And so this is actually a finished project. This is somebody walking on the trail. It was finished late last year. And this was a map. We came down to two options, actually the east or west side of Hoyt Road. They avoided the couple options that went through the middle. And they chose the west side because they started looking at the costs and constraints, the number of driveways, the number of trees. There was an area, this is a big issue, like huge trees in the right of way. The minute you start taking big trees down, you'll get like 20 phone calls. I mean, it's like, and so we started looking at those things. How many trees would have to be removed, how much retaining wall, how much fill would have to go in swaled areas. And they made the decision to go on the west side. Primarily, if you look at all those orange, that's all neighborhoods with a lot of kids in it. And it would hook right up to get them to the soccer fields or down into town, which they could take a sidewalk right to the schools. So that's why that was chosen. So, that's sort of the whole, like, going through the process of what you have to do to start planning it. But then you can get the plan, and then what do you do? Now you have the plan done. You want this trail. They want this trail on the west side of the road. What do? And now is sort of the hard work, honestly, because now you have to sort of sell it to everybody. Hopefully you have a lot of people on board already, but you got to educate people. You put together, there's a community in Burt Township in Sheboygan County. They wanted a trail. 5 years ago, it was just an idea. They did this feasibility study. They're in a phase 1 construction this year, 5 miles of an 18-mile trail. And what they did is they put together a brochure. They went around. They did it. It has to be locally driven. They had neighborhood parties. They talked about easements. They needed a lot of easements, to get donations for match money. They worked with the community, engaged them all in some of the decision making and where the trail should go. And they also had I was just telling Julie the story, sort of interesting. They had this bike event before the trail was even built. I thought it was sort of silly, like, what are you going to do, ride this road that you think is unsafe? But what they did is they brought everybody together and they talked about why it was unsafe, and they showed them why it was unsafe. They actually put 2 cars driving one way and a mom with a baby carriage and someone walking and trying to move on this facility. So everybody had this visual idea of why they needed a trail and why the community was investing in it. So, you know, it all takes a lot of time and energy, and it really has to be led locally and by the people of the community who want it. So now you start selling it. Acquisition. Acquisition is the hardest part. It's easier, I think, to probably develop a trail than it is to get the easements and land you need. It depends on where it is. I mean, I don't think you have any rail corridors in the township, but rail corridors are easy. Usually it's one corridor. You can put it up the middle. Utility corridors can work, but usually you need easements from the landowners on them. So don't ever assume that that's just an easy one. But it's something that can be used at times, depending who the landowners are underneath. I always say work with public entities first. You always think state land is easy. It's usually easier, but not always the simplest thing. Usually you can get it in the long run, but start early. Don't make any assumption. If you do have state land, engage the state officials and make sure they're on board with it, and make sure you get the process going, because it could take a while to get a use agreement. And then always work with your largest property owners. If you can get a couple key large property owners, usually you can get some of those smaller property owners to mix in. And then also have options. If you have an option that cut through the middle and you had 3 or 4 property owners and there was no option and one said no, your project's ruined. So a lot of times it's better to go, maybe you have to go in and out and you have to curve, but have a place where you can opt out to maybe a public road right away. Maybe your design isn't quite as nice, but you have an option and it wouldn't kill the whole project. So sort of looking at those different things. I always say, and I think Julie would agree, you always ask for a donation of easements. Don't offer to pay for them. In the long run, if you have one property owner left and you have to pay for it, then you do. But it could add up very quickly. Also, the state does have funding to acquire easements for trail projects, but sometimes it's hard to know what that is. But you really, if you think you're going to need a lot of easements and have to pay for them, you need to figure out those costs and apply for a grant just to acquire it, because you can't apply for grants for acquisition and development at the same time. They have to be separate. So then you move to development. Consider funding an engineering plan first, locally. If hopefully locally you can invest in that, because that'll give you good numbers of what those actually acquisition needs are, as well as your costs. And you need good detailed numbers when you apply for grants, because if your numbers are wrong, you have to pay the difference. So you really need to have those details there. Really important. And those, then of course, some of the details I talked about, like the wetlands, like boardwalks or retaining walls, those are the numbers that start adding up. I can give you a general number to put an asphalt trail in on a flat rail grade is $150,000 a mile. But once you start adding retaining walls or boardwalks, or you have to loop in and out of a private property, those costs will start to increase. And so you really need some of those details. Then start looking about potential funds. There are some funding agents. MDOT has money through the federal transportation bill for non-motorized transportation facilities. So that's why transportation is important, not just recreation, because you're applying for a transportation facility. And the DNR has money for match of that, but it's not that much money. They only give $300,000 for development projects, and that doesn't go that far. If you're looking at $150,000 a mile for one flat, easy trail, you start looking at it's not that much. So you really need to use that as match. And then, of course, local foundations and local fundraising is really important, because any of these grant agents want to see local investment in how they're going to invest in that. So these are just quick questions I always put out there. I can go through quickly. Is development questions that you got to think about, and people don't, and then you need to think about it, is where are those match funds going to come from? If it's multi-jurisdictional, who's going to be the lead agency and who's going to build it? When it comes to federal transportation grants, you have to be an Act 51 agency to apply for the funds. So a township therefore can't apply for the funds, but the road commission can. So it's working with the right agency to do that. Who will manage the construction project? Who will maintain the facility? That's the biggest one. None of the grant agents will give you money unless you have commitment from someone to take care of it. So it can't be the local Boy Scout troop, because they won't accept that, because the Boy Scout troop might not exist next week. It usually always has to be some kind of government agency who's going to take care of it in the long run. Or I would assume TART, it has to be government?
It's gotta be, yeah.
It has to be government. So that's really important. And so then also the sustainability to maintain it. So where the fund's going to come from to maintain it in the long run. So it's really important. And sometimes maybe you need to start thinking, is an authority needed? Maybe it's a multi-jurisdictional trail, and each government says they'll help, but how are they going to facilitate that? And there are different ways to create trail authorities or recreation authorities to manage those facilities. And that's not always needed. Sometimes it's done on a handshake and that works between communities, but a lot of communities are moving towards that. So up in Marquette, they're moving towards a recreation authority to start managing some of those. So there are some great success stories, and here are just some great local pictures of either groundbreakings or ribbon cuttings to move forward. This is the network that I work with. So it's actually 280 miles of trail, about 220 are developed. And so I'm going to talk about the Little Traverse Wheelway that goes from Harbor Springs to Petoskey. And the reason it's a great story to talk about is it's been in the works for almost 40 years. No joke. This has been planned, and it was someone's vision. He engaged local people. It was actually a local bicycle club and local Kiwanis and the county planner. I think back table 40 years ago, they were going to do this. They were going to do a rail trail. And honestly, if it wasn't for that vision a long time ago, it would never have happened. This project is complicated, not easy. If you ever tried to build it all at once, it never would have happened. It was built in 11 phases over 20 years. It is now done. The last phase was finished late last year. I put this map together because I'm the only one that knows this. And I thought somebody else needed to have all this information because there's different owners of the trail and different managers of the trail. And I'm the only one that knows exactly where those lines are. And so right now it's not the perfect solution, but it works. There's no recreation authority. Everybody does their own thing. They sort of communicate. We've talked about having at least an informal group to talk about it regularly. But it's pretty exciting to see what can happen having that vision and plan. And it's different than having on-road facilities, although this does have a few places. There's one place that there's a 6-foot boardwalk, 6-foot sidewalk that goes through the historic area. Talk about historic elements of Bayview. It's about a mile long. It was a compromise when they redid the highway, and they put in a 6-foot sidewalk, which also in this case accommodates bicycles. There's a small part in the city of Petoskey that goes on the road just for about a quarter mile. So there's different things like that it incorporates, but in general, it's a separate trail. There has been a lot of obstacles over the years, and these are two of the big ones. The picture on the left is a famous area called the Resort Bluff section. It's on a bluff overlooking Lake Michigan. It's beautiful. It's 2 miles. We believe it's the most beautiful section of trail in Michigan, if not the country. It took a long time to acquire. They had easements. They used grants to buy some of the property. It's a rail corridor that reverted back to public ownership. So we needed, I can't remember, like 18 easements. And as I said, there's no option. You're on a bluff. You can't just go up the bluff and around the one property. And it came down to one property at 100 feet. The guy would not give an easement. And I kept saying, well, can't we just get someone who has a lot of money to buy the property, put the easement on it, and resell it? Seems simple enough. Well, someone did it. It was pretty crazy. We had a guy buy the property, and then he actually sold it, put the easement on it, and sold it to the county. And the county bought it, and then they just recently sold it. So they kept it for a lot of years, and then when the property values changed, because it wasn't tied up in any kind of grants, they could resell it. They have the easement on it, and the trail was able to be built. So that was one, and it stayed persistent. I can tell you, I moved here. They were planning to put the trail up on the highway, and I had seen this corridor, and I said, no, we can't do this. We're going to get this. And I made the first map that showed every property along this trail, and who we had friendly easements from and who we didn't, and we had the maybes, the yeses, and the definite nos, and what we had to do to work on that. And it took a long time. And the unfortunate thing is one of the property owners who was a definite no, there was, he had passed away, and the wife sold the property to the county. So, I mean, sometimes it can take that long to have change in ownership, so it's sort of crazy. And the one on the right was the very last piece that was done. It's right in Harbor Springs. It went right along Weequatonssing. It's a private golf club, an exclusive neighborhood and golf club, and they wouldn't give an easement. They built up to their property line. There was a gap in the trail of about maybe a half a mile, 2/3 of a mile. There was also this expensive drainage problem that MDOT and the trail engineer fought about for a long time, what the solution was for it. It took a really long time to get it done, but what ended up happening was the pressure on this golf club to give the easement, when now you have a 26-mile trail, you have this small gap, you are forcing kids onto the highway on N119, and the golf club came around and gave an easement, and MDOT worked, and they actually had to, this is normally supposed to be 14-foot wide boardwalk, and it's only 12-foot wide, and they gave an exception to get through there. So you got to stay persistent. And sometimes you have to be flexible. This was a crazy thing with the DNR. It's around here at Betsy Valley Trail. If you've ever been on it, there's a small area that turns to crushed limestone. It's a paved trail. And the property owners didn't want a paved trail through there. And so they have a road bike route to use a road, and it's a marked signed route to go around that area. And there's a crushed limestone trail for walkers and bicyclists who will use the crushed limestone. So sometimes you have to be flexible. And so those are the kind of things you have to look at. And eventually, you can usually get to a point down the line where you can be cutting a ribbon and opening a facility up. So that's the thing. And then you think you're done, but the job really isn't ever done. I talked about those amenities, the trailheads, making trails great. Those things continue, the sustainability of the trail, cleaning it, brushing it, maintaining it over a long time, and adding different facilities along there. So it's never really done, and but they're great projects, and they really, I think, do bring the community together, and there's a place to get people outside and enjoying what Northern Michigan has to offer. So we thought we'd sort of end here and sort of start talking a little bit about some of the community goals and facilitate some discussion, but first we could just open it up to any general questions, if there are any.
I can clarify something really quick. TART, I shouldn't speak so quickly. I'm not sure if we can accept easements. I don't think so, but what we generally do is enter into an agreement to help maintain. So we provide the light maintenance on almost every trail except for the Lino Trail. We own that. So if there's brush that needs cleared or eyes and ears, that's what we do. Typically, we don't take the maintenance, and nor are people are comfortable donating to TART. So easements get donated, but they want to know eventually it gets into the road commission. So we negotiate a lot of easements, but people like to donate to, well, if you're giving an easement, they like to have it in a government agency, because nonprofits just, you think your government's around for a while. Let's not look at Detroit, but theoretically, your government's there for a while. Yeah. But generally, that's where nonprofits like TART step in and can be helpful.
Definitely.
And I will, the one last thing that she said too, that piecemeal, the Petoskey piece, we look a lot like that in Grand Traverse County. Each section is owned by a different agency. It's either city, county, TART, and then the county splits into a couple different pieces. So it's crazy messed up. But I'd say, and it was all done on a handshake. Everybody has a handshake. There's no written agreements pretty much anywhere except for between MDOT and the Road Commission. But in general, we work really well together. So it's messy and it can be better, but it does function.
That's what it is. Sometimes that's just what works, and you just have to go with what works. And just a funny story today, the DNR owns one piece, 1 mile of that trail that I was talking about. And locals developed it, and I was talking to the person who's now in charge of that trail. He's new, and he happened to be in the area today, and I was explaining some problems that we're having out there. And he said, well, who's signed on for maintenance on this? And I'm like, oh no, he asked who was it leased to? And I'm like, it's not. It was all done on a handshake, because that's how things were done about 15 years ago. Yeah. It was done on a handshake, and this was before they required government to maintain stuff. And actually our maintenance says the service clubs of Emmett County will maintain this trail. That's what's
so,
we didn't even get that. Yeah, so that's so things can happen like that, but things have changed. I don't think that now things have to be a little more official when it comes to working with the state. But yeah.
I have a question. I live over on West Long Lake Road, and so I ride my road bike around around Long Lake, so north, east, south, and west. And the South Long Lake Road, where you mentioned that, where you have the paved shoulder now, was a huge improvement in my ride and feeling safe. Now, you might ask, well, why do I need anything more if I'm already doing it? But I feel uncomfortable, all the time because of the high amount of traffic, and then the high speed differential between me and the traffic, because we have the 55-mile-per-hour speed limits. And then my 3 sons would like to ride with me, but they're not quite as experienced, and so they're kind of scared, and their mom thinks I'm crazy for even, going out there. So what I wondered was, what are the chances for more of that, more like South Long Lake Road, and extending more of those paved shoulders? I know it's not a perfect solution, but it sure was a huge improvement.
Yeah. Leslie, do you have any kind of weigh in on that? I'm not sure what the road commission's sort of asset management schedule or plans are
I
around
think
here.
they're going to be doing another section of North Long Lake Road. But I have to say that I've heard from a lot of people that they felt more comfortable before they paved the shoulder, because it's not very well marked, and people, especially around curves, feel like they have more pavement when they're driving, so they drive faster and they crowd that trail or that paved shoulder, and people don't love it as much as they thought they would.
And that's an interesting design. The devil is in the details when it comes to design. There are a lot of places where you go to rural roads and people immediately, to put a bike on, say, well, let's widen up the shoulder, let's pave the shoulder. When you have, in particular, rural roads that are wider, and all you did is widen asphalt, for a driver, that just looks like more road. And for drivers, when we have more road, we feel more comfortable going faster, right? We can swerve and miss that deer. So there is that. But
there is. I had one question. On one of the slides on the paved shoulder, you had a double white line. I was thinking, when I saw that,
right,
if I was driving a car, I'd think more about crossing that double white line than a single. So I don't know if there's any signage or stuff like that could help that.
yes, I think my answer, and it's a generic answer, is yes. It is, you want to look at what you are. They're doing all kinds of fun things in mostly urban areas with striping to alert drivers that they're entering something different, or they're sharing a facility when they don't have enough room, for example, for a bike lane. MDOT won't put the bike lane symbols in a lot of roads, and neither will our county road commission, because they don't meet the proper specs. But you can do some different things with paint, some different things with signage. Those are better ways. I think when you are looking at expanding road shoulders, I always ask the road commission, wider is better. Don't give me a minimum, give me a maximum. Let's talk about what you need, because if the answer is, oh, we don't have the money, that's the easiest answer in the world for me. We don't have the money. If you care enough, and you care enough, and I care enough, we can figure out the money issue. There are other issues that are much harder to tackle. So I think our road commission today is actually very open and friendly to the idea of providing better facilities for more modes. We just need to be upfront in the planning process, because the last thing that you can do is ask for a facility when they're already through and they've done their budgeting. It's very, very hard to go back and say, oh, but we want it. So in your case, I don't know specifically about Long Lake Road. I've heard different on people liking the roads or not, but I'm talking to experienced cyclists, so maybe there's just a different feedback.
mechanism?
One
They don't
thing
need?
that would tend to, I mean, if a lower speed limit went along with it, that would help a lot too, I would think.
And that's a tricky thing to do. That,
Is it
lower
really?
speed limit versus more money, we can do more money. Lower the speed limit is very hard. It sounds like a simple fix, but that's usually your last option. They will not lower speed. You do a speed study, and you don't want to do a speed study most of the time because the logic that's back there on what sets our speed limits is not what most of us feel really comfortable with. It has to do with how fast people are going, and they will up your speed if they find that people are going faster. So that's usually, believe it or not, the last.
And did that actually happen in Petoskey? They did a community wanted a speed study, and they went from up to 45. It was, I think, 35, and they wanted it lowered to 25 because it was residential, and they moved it to 45.
So that's, I know, it's weird, but design, it's really important. And that's where working closely with the road agency and talking about what your needs are is critical. So before the road agency says, we're doing a project on Long Lake next year, you need to be like 2 years before that. And I think the road commission now is very open to that.
We do have a workshop coming up. It'll be in the fall with the road commission. They're too busy this summer, but they do want to talk to us. A lot of people want to talk to them about speed limits and other traffic issues. But that is another thing we want to be talking to them about, and we'll be sure that we include in that discussion.
Yeah, because if there were just improvements in, signage and stuff like that, where they wouldn't have to spend a lot of money, even to make the South Long Lake Road that better, that would be great.
That, I'm not sure, Leslie, is there a non-motorized plan for the township? No. Because I think that would really be probably a good next step, is if you develop a non-motorized plan, the way the funding is it works into these road projects. So if your non-motorized plan says you want a shoulder, because you've done all this research and engaged everybody, you do what I just talked about, but on the township level. And then you want a paved shoulder, and the road commission is going to do that. Well, all of a sudden, you have this whole reason. So then you can apply for these federal funds to say, the road commission just says they want it for a shoulder, they'll say no. But if it's part of a bigger plan, and you can see why it's connected, the township passed a complete streets ordinance, a complete streets resolution, it sort of makes it all fit in. So it is really important to get something like that done, especially if you're thinking about these things, because it's much less expensive to build a shoulder when they're redoing a road. Trying to add a shoulder, like if you have a road that's crumbling, you can't add a shoulder to it, and so if you're rebuilding a road and you add 2 to 4 feet, it's not that much more. But if you try to do it without adding it to an existing road, it's fairly costly, and most road agencies don't want to do it. So it's something to think about.
The plan is, to me, the most critical piece because it prepares you and it legitimizes kind of those requests instead of feeling like the road commission, they get hit from 100 different sides. So having a plan that talks about your priorities is really that first step, because the road commission, they can relate to plans. The world they live in is a 5-year transportation improvement plan. They start thinking way back when, and if you can engage them in those early discussions, you can be budgeting and working forward. So knowing what you want and why you want it, that's usually one of the first things we talk about. Is
and you had a name for that? It was a non-motorized
plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
non-motorized.
Non-motorized plan. So it would include trails, it would include shared roads, it would include paved shoulders, it would include all the different facilities that we talked about.
Does the county have one that's county-wide township that touches all our townships?
Not that I've seen.
Boy, that would just make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Instead of, because your township, I bet, touches another township, which touches another township. Just saying.
Yeah. It would be good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big piece. We just had the Burt Lake Trail that I was talking about. They are building 5.1 miles, and the counties, it ends up there might be this transportation money, and they just decided to do this road. Well, it's on our plan. It shows it right on there that we want paved shoulders. And so we went to them and said, hey, can we add this on? And then I called the transportation enhancement grant folks and said, can we apply for a grant to add, they're building 2-foot shoulders, we want to make 6-foot shoulders. And they said, yeah, it's on the plan. We already funded phase 1. This makes sense. It fits right in. And so sometimes I was like, we never thought that would happen. It just sort of came up out of the blue. So.
I do have kind of a, maybe this is too big to talk about right now, but a big issue I have is that we have lots of subdivisions. A lot of them have public roads in them, and when they were first platted, they don't have any neighboring subdivisions around them, but they have a lot of road ends, connectors to whatever might happen next door. And usually we can't get private roads to do that. We're trying to get some new standards that would require that of private roads and to make them all connect together. But we have a lot of these sitting out there, and sometimes another development comes along and they don't want to connect to that road because they're not a public road, but then they'll say, oh, well, we'll put a trail through there. If we're lucky, they'll maybe offer to put in a trail. But, I think it's a great opportunity to have another level of road network that's more comfortable for people, even if there's no trails anywhere, no sidewalks, because it's, local traffic going slowly within a subdivision, and most people know each other, and you're not sending kids out on one of our, major county roads even on a paved shoulder. And they can get to their friends in the next subdivision. They can potentially get to a school. I mean, is that the appropriate kind of thing to talk about in that sort of planning? Is it a cop-out, or is it one of the tools we could use?
I think it's one of the tools that you can use. Connecting neighborhoods is really important.
It's a tool.
Yeah, it's definitely.
One that should be in, I think, is a really good tool to put in an ordinance.
Yeah.
So that it's not an option. Yeah, I know. But yeah, to me, it is hard. But I think if your community says, you know what, this is important to us, walkability, bikeability, connections between communities, neighborhoods is important. You're not demanding something from a developer, because the flip side is they're demanding that of you. Eventually your folks who move into this are going to be asking for that. So it is a political, you need your leadership there with you, but I love ordinances to help give it a carrot too. Like what that carrot, we in Charlotte, they used a lot of incentives for like their open space and kind of the develop. There was a lot of negotiation in there, but the carrot that they used instead of a stick was providing for trail connectivity. And maybe they didn't have to do X because they made that connection. So think of it as a tool. There was a hand there.
Well, on that point, we live near Westwood School, and there's like 4 subdivisions that back up to that school, and none of them connect. You got to go on the road, but in our subdivision, there is one little, space between properties where there's been a trail created.
Mm-hmm. Goat
and
path.
the kids just, a little goat path through there, and there's another one on the other side of the road. But when you're driving your kid back and forth, you got to watch out because kids pop out of there onto this little subdivision. But the other point I wanted to make, so, that's a good point. But I, just like this gentleman here, I bicycle around Long Lake all the time. It's just a perfect length. It's a great asset, and it's a wonderful thing to bike around. And South Long Lake Road improvement was phenomenal for me. I've gotten yelled at, and guys have stopped their cars before that road was improved to scream at me about being on the road because they tried to pass me in a blind corner. But now, maybe you go a little faster, but when you see bikes, there is room for everybody. But I'd like to see that all the way around the lake. Just for the local people, my son's got a job in Interlochen, but won't bike to work because there's no shoulder on West Long Lake. But also, people coming up here for the summer, I'm sure it'd be a great asset too. That's one of the first slides mentioned. Because it's just, you're going to Bloomers, you're going up to Long Lake Grocery, you're going down to Interlochen, you want to be able to get around, you're going to the little township parks we have now, or you can go hiking.
I'd get trail rumors every day if it was there.
But I'd heard rumor somewhere 3 or 4 years ago that, you know, there was gonna be wide shoulders all the way around the lake, but maybe that was just a rumor.
It's a good rumor.
Good. I'd love to see it. The South Long Lake has been phenomenal for me. I think it's great.
That was partially funded by the tribe, I think.
And TART, actually.
Thank
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was amazed when I came up here. I think that's great. And that, to me, that's a very Northern Michigan thing. We all figure out if there's something we want bad enough, how to get it done. So, I mean, Long Lake Township is taking the leadership level in their park development and their open space. So, yeah, I think you guys have, there's a will, there's a way around here.
And I think the Petoskey project is definitely a testament to patience. Take your time, eventually it will happen. I lived in Petoskey in the 90s, and I remember riding along the bluffs then, and you were, at times in the spring with the washout, it was an adventure. You might not make it. And then slowly but surely they paved it and they got the easements. And it actually became not so dangerous because there were spots where it was like, you had a narrow washout, you had to get across, it was all dirt back there, and it seemed like a 1,000-foot drop on one side. So it is actually a beautiful, beautiful trail. It was definitely wild then, but now it's just, if anyone who hasn't ridden it should go up there and ride that and see what time and effort and patience will bring you.
It is one of my favorite places.
Yeah. And that was when, honestly, the partners that were involved in that it's amazing. I mean, it was MDOT, the DEQ was involved. They got Coastal Zone Management to buy some of the land. The county, the townships, the Trails Council. I think Rotary put a bunch of money in, Bay Harbor Foundation put money in, the Community Foundation. It was everybody together, all these different government agencies. So it took a long time, but things can happen.
When you said the plan is the #1 starting slot, if you're going for a plan, trying to get started on that, I like the idea, of course, of a bike trail around Long Lake. That's been discussed for years. I think when you get down to the North Long Lake spot with the stone wall, that's where you run into a problem. And I know there's been talk about going inland and trying to get clearance from neighbors, and I like the idea you had about maybe people are willing to donate an area to go through. But to start with the plan, who do you go to for that? How do you seek out someone to help you with a plan? I mean, are you ladies available for consulting, or is there a list of people to go to help you with starting a plan?
There are. I mean, many of the planning firms, like private planning firms, you could hire to help facilitate the process. It would be the community developing the plan, but they would facilitate that process. That is something I could do. I could be hired to do that. So it's going through the process. It could be done internally. I don't know if staffing, you can do that, but.
I'm sure Leslie could. I work for the township too. I'm sure Leslie would be the point person, but there must be someone who could help with that, who's developed plans in the past.
So yes. I mean, it is something, it's something I could do, there's other firms that could do the same thing. So there's a lot of planning firms that do that, and there's some that would probably focus more on recreation and non-motorized, and you'd want to make sure they have experience with that, would be the main thing.
So we have a lot of good resources. Emily is excellent. We do have landscape architecture firms in town that have trail design and building experience. TART is gonna probably be more there as if you need like fiduciary, meaning if you are looking for grants. We help fundraise. We would be kind of one of those stakeholders at the table. As much as I love and would love to do everything and make everything happen around here, that's not really, you wouldn't want us. You would want us at the table to help, bring advocates out or we have a lot of experience with what's happening around, but we would be definitely an engaged partner. But Garfield, it's been done different ways. Garfield Township did it on their own through their Park and Rec Commission.
Some do.
Some do. I am a big fan of contracting some of it out, because unless you have that expertise just in-house, there are a lot of, or you have it in your commission. You just want to make sure you have your technical experts around the table to make sure that you're thinking about all the options, because you can get to a plan, but if it's not feasible or practical, then you spend a lot of time maybe working on something that if you could have had that technical expertise at the table to say, you know what, if you're going to do it here, it's going to be X, Y, Z. As long as you're bringing that technical expertise in, you'll be fine. You don't need to hire it out. Sometimes it's just quicker and more efficient. Traverse City is doing their own internally. I can tell you that it's been a year and a half, so there's delay when it's staffed internally as well, because different projects come up that you can't necessarily know ahead of time. So there are pros and cons. You've got to think about it. You've got to talk about what you want, what your product is in the end, and what your expertise is around the table.
Because there's the non-motorized plan would be a more generalized, plan, looking at what the community wants, figuring out those pros and cons, putting something on paper. And then the next step is, hiring an engineering firm to actually start. Once you pick one project you want to work on, is detailing that information out. So,
what's the narrowest a trail should be? I mean, what you've seen lots of different trails. If you run into logistics where there's problems with certain areas, like say swamp, or you have to do the best you can to make that link work. What's the narrowest you can possibly live with?
Well, 10 feet is the standard, 10. And that's the standard is 10 feet with 2-foot shoulders, and they don't like to ever vary from that. Honestly, it's very difficult to get a variance. The fact they did on that one was probably because the project was in the works for 30 years, and I think MDOT finally just gave up and said fine. But they really don't like to. And if you get federal funds, which a lot of our money for this is through federal funds, you have to meet that standard. So if you're building a local trail on your own through a park, you can make it, and it's local money, you can make it any width you want. The standard used to be 8 foot, and on the Little Traverse Wheelway, that's the interesting thing because it took so long. So I told you about the 6-foot shoulders. Part of the trail is 8 foot, and then it turns to 10 foot, and then back to 8 foot, and back to 10 foot, because it was built in these different pieces. And you can feel as a bike rider the difference. The 10 foot, it's much more comfortable, especially if you get a rollerblader in there kicking, a couple bikes, 2 bikes going one way and a runner passing. 10 feet is really what you do want for a multi-use trail that's going to be used quite a bit. So
we have the same experience. The TART was built the same way. It's 8 feet, then it goes to 10. We widened the section downtown 3 years ago, made it 8. It was 8 feet in between Division and 72. It was widened to 10. It was like night and day out there because as a mom with a stroller, you just kind of tense up every time.
Actually, in urban areas, they're recommending 12 foot now. So I actually believe like the TART trail and in the part in downtown Petoskey, 12 foot would be better. Just because when you have a lot of tourists walking and getting to these spots, it just would give you a little more room. But so for you, it would be 10 foot.
Okay. It just depends on your use, who your money is from. It should all be driven. I mean, sometimes it's all driven by money, but really it should be driven by who's using your trail and why you're building it. You're in an urban promenade in downtown Detroit, it better be 14, 16, 18. It just depends on the context. You're taking federal money, it's going to be 10.
So right now, Long Lake Township doesn't have anything. The South Long Lake thing was sort of just a one-off opportunity or whatever. And there's no recreational or non-motorized plan or trail plan or proposed plan. There's no map. Or anything like that.
Good first step.
That would be the first step.
I didn't have a clue what I was going to walk into. I didn't see a map on it.
Well, what's amazing is you get that map, and I could tell you with this Burt Township thing, and all of a sudden that map, MDOT's like, oh yeah, that's on the map. I mean, it was like amazing. It was like, okay, so I can't guarantee it's going to happen, but it creates the opportunity
to let it happen. So.
And Leslie's right, Tribe, they did Long Lake. They are a partner. They do road development, and you're legitimate when you're on the map.
Yeah.
So it's helpful. Just even for prioritization's sake, it's helpful.
Yeah. So, yeah, good thing when you're doing it is you would, you're doing your non-motorized plan, and I've heard different things about Long Lake, but maybe you engage more people and you start prioritizing it. Maybe there's some small wins. Maybe it's just that connection between the neighborhood and the school. And maybe that's something locally you can do, but it's a small win to get some momentum going. So that's something to look at too. And sometimes that's what it is. Those little trail you're talking about, what in planners, I love saying it, it's the technical term is a desire line.
That's
In a lot of cities, that's where they build sidewalks. They just wait, and then they figure out where people want to go, and then they, put a sidewalk there. They don't have to plan. People told them what they want. So.
Did we talk enough?
Yeah.
Sorry, you don't look too glazed.
3 more minutes.
3 more minutes.
I did want to bring up the Grand Vision included a component of the planning was the corridors of significance, and North Long Lake Road is one of those corridors of significance, and so there is a plan for what happens on North Long Lake Road through the Grand Vision, and part of that plan is a trail, an off-road trail, separated trail from all the way up North Long Lake Road to the county, to the Benzie County line. And it sounded incredibly expensive and like a pipe dream, and I thought, well, maybe they can phase it or something, but the whole thing is in that plan. And I like knowing that it's there because it does, it's one of those maps that does get a lot of attention, especially for federal funding, but we still need somebody to champion that and to say, okay, we're going to do this project next. And I'm not really sure where that stands right now, but I think I'm really interested to find out what might happen with that next. Do you know anything about that at all?
Of course, yeah. Well, so Grand Vision is going through their, one, it is an important document. Whatever your feelings on the Grand Vision, it's a really important document because it does have meaning in our community. The Grand Vision is going through their action plan, so they recognize that it was big vision, how are you going to get to those action steps. So I think they're in those very early stages. I think it's an excellent time to talk to the Council of Governments, who is really helping lead that effort, to talk about what are those action steps, how are we going to move forward from these projects that are listed in there to implementation of those projects. As far as I know, they're pretty much still in the next phase of planning, which is developing an action plan. And so now would be the time to start those conversations. And I think the people to start with would be the Council of Governments, because they're kind of driving the bus in terms of the planning framework. Your township leadership level, whether it's the Planning Commission, letting the powers that be, which is Road Commission, COG, know what your priorities are, and that if this is a project, how do you move it from pipe dream to reality? It's a team effort there. But my guess is the way things are working in the Grand Vision, you got to step up, and say this is a priority for us.
Definitely advocate for yourselves and make it a priority for the region, because squeaky wheel usually does get the grease, especially when it comes to a lot of these projects, a lot of the funding. I've seen one champion make a whole trail happen because he's at every road commission meeting, at every county board meeting, and they're able to keep moving it forward, but they're willing to put the time and effort and raise the money and do that. So sometimes that's what it takes. And letting people know what the desires are for the community, I think, is really important regionally, because when you look at grants, we talked about those regional connections. If it's in the Grand Vision Plan,
when you write a grant, I mean, you're gonna have that in there, because you have to prove why this is important, not just for you locally, but the greater population of the region. So it's good to be in there. It's probably in, the COG did a trail feasibility thing a while back. It's, I can't remember the name of it, but there is one. Yeah, the COG did one, and there's one for Northwest Michigan. And that's a good thing to go look at. It's outdated. We actually found that we have done a lot of the things actually in that. Because I actually had the MDOT question something. Well, why is this a priority when all these other things are here? And I said, well, because we did 1, 2, and 3, so it's the next priority. And so they actually do look at that. So I would take a look at that. It probably needs to be updated. It might be a good thing to talk to
It's a little out
about.
of date, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it was done about 8 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
So it's 7:32, and I know we're going to run out of tape. Our tape is an hour and a half long, so automatic cutoff. But we have lots of cookies and whatnot back there, and you're all welcome to mill about while we close up shop, but we don't want to keep you any longer than the promised time. So.
Okay.
We hope that everyone signed in, because if we start a group for non-motorized trails, and we'd like to keep the people that have attended tonight, at least give them the opportunity to be involved.
Yes, definitely.
What if we live in a different township and a different county?
We'd still welcome your comments.
No ID card at the door.
Oh, we're from Elmira.
We're in Lake Ann.
Benton.
Okay, so
Close enough.
We can just get something to North Long Lake. That's good.
Well, it's good for you guys to see how you can connect too. So
Yeah.
good thing to look at.
You gotta work on Long Lake in your county. The road gets ugly.
Oh, gosh.
Well, thanks for inviting us here tonight. It's a lot of fun. Emily does a lot of good work up in her neck of the woods, and it's fun to have her come down and share.
Well, thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to, I'll be around here for a little bit, and you can always give me a call. Leslie has my contact information, so.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks.